Welcome to this Political Theory SRC session of IAPSS. Really happy everyone made it. The question I want to really address here starts out with the so-called Böckenförde Dilemma, according to which the liberal secularized state lives on conditions that it itself cannot guarantee due to secularization. This is sort of a problem of collective action, according to Mansler-Olson in his book, The Logic of Collective Action. Unless the number of individuals, this is a quote, in a group is quite small, or unless there is coercion or some other special device to make individuals act in their common interest, rational, self-interested individuals will not act to achieve their common or group interests. So on the level of the nation states, you could read this in the sense that Böckenförde is suggesting a problem of collective action here with religion, like homogeneous social religion, kind of falling by the wayside as a means of coercing, or not coercing, but like making sure collective action is enabled. Now, this also fits to what I expounded in my earlier presentations about Habermas's conception of increasingly decentralized worldviews that arise with the rationalization of the life world, which starts with secularization. That's a hard word. According to him, also, this leads to a so-called fragmentation of everyday consciousness, making it harder to arbitrate communicative action. So my research question then is, how do religious and post-metaphysical attributions of meaning differ from post-metaphysical attributions of meaning? And what follows from this difference for the motivation of collective action? I'm going to expound this further soon, but for now, attributions of meaning are just that. We as a society attribute meaning to whatever object may be, such as religion and religious norms. And when they fall by the wayside, as Böckenförde suggests, it might be harder to make sure collective action is enabled. So the idea then, and this is where I get the term meaning really, is to introduce certain psychological sources into this issue. And these are psychological sources regarding the search for meaning as a motivator for collective action. Clay Routledge, first, this would be Clay Routledge's book Supernatural, Death, Meaning, and the Power of the Invisible World. And then second, also, unfortunately, Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief. So Routledge regards increasingly deinstitutionalized and individualized spirituality, and Peterson, with his far earlier book, does so regarding collectives such as otherwise secular polities, amongst other things. Believe me when I say I'm not exactly happy about being confronted with Peterson here, but his book is called Maps of Meaning, and he is regarding these issues. Nevertheless, as he has been called an anti-feminist, Islamophobic, racist, pseudo-scientific demagogue, and I have in fact been warned about how disregarded he is by the scientific community, by my advisor, I am really not sure if he's going to stay in the project. Like when I actually finish the dissertation, I might sort him out at the very beginning, and he might not even be named in the end. For now, he is such a famous public figure and a really critical one, the problematic one, quite possibly, that I just felt I can't really go around him when his book is really like directly addressing meaning as a motivator for action, and also collective action with a perceivable socio-scientific skew, like a social skew for a psychologist. And his infamy alone makes considering him as someone who approached meaning as a motivation for action in the context of religion just important, or at least it seems like that for me now. And as we will see, his conception of meaning is highly adaptable for the project. This makes analyzing his approach on a collective rather than an individual level more interesting, as it may also reveal the consequences his individualist viewpoint has for his works. His second book, 12 Rules for Life, is regarded as a somewhat troublesome and unscientific popular guidebook, but I believe the roots of his reactionary turn might be found even in this older publication. So then, with this input from psychology, and as you can see, I also have other sources in mind that sort of regard the issue of meaning in the periphery. I would, yeah, that's basically the idea. Introducing this meaning concept and negotiating it with other meaning concepts from sociology, philosophy, and as we will see from linguistics to a degree. And the thesis then would be that post-metaphysical attributions of meaning differ from religious and metaphysical attributions of meaning in ways that can explain their differences regarding the motivation of collective action. Now, I have some basic theories to just expound that I'm going to regard to just expound the matter of collective action or the problem of collective action. Like we have the classics here, contractualism theories, and then we also have game theory. Olson could be viewed as a game theorist, among other things, and this would just help to demarcate the landscape of the motivation of and behavior in collective action. Nevertheless, with some comments by my advisor, especially the game theory part of the project has just been really reduced to a degree in favor of the linguistic part, so I won't dwell on this. Next, just a refresher on the whole Habermas thing. So far, he really just helps me conceive of everything in a sort of systematic view. However, it is far from assured that he will stay the sort of main focus he is right now. This just has a lot to do with the fact that I had a lot to do with his theory so far, which made it, you know, practical for me to use him to write an expose and so forth. That may well still change, but as you can see, at least I can enter the two objects, or like the two phenomena I wanna compare here into the system, the analytical social analytical system he worked out. And religious and metaphysical worldviews can just be placed into the life world, into its part of culture, of cultural worldviews. That just makes a lot of sense. And with post-metaphysical thought, it's kind of different, as it is a way of perceiving and less just like a source, a background notion that actors or interactors would use. But nevertheless, it would most likely be there with the interaction competences, but probably that would have to be worked out more closely and detailed when I actually explore it in my dissertation. Now, the matter of psychology. Firstly, the Peterson books, Maps of Meaning. He calls meaning a product of social interaction there, and that alone makes it really interesting, because meaning is considered somewhat of a product of social interactions in both some linguistic theories and also in some social philosophical and social scientific theories. Like, to actually make them work together with each other, that would be the actual work of the dissertation, but it already seems like it could fit really well, possibly. He says meaning is socially ascribed motivational relevance of objects for action, and that it is irrationally pursued by humans. So all this just really fits well with the thinking angle that I'm going for here. But like I said, I might come up with more from other more credible sources, or like sources that at least stay credible since they've been written. Yes, such as Routledge's book Supernatural Death, Meaning and the Power of the Invisible World, where a motivational analysis of reasons for religious or spiritual thought is conducted. And well, Routledge arrives at recognizing that even atheists fall back on religious or spiritual belief to answer basic existential questions about the meaning of life and inevitability of death. In all these psychological sources, the existentialist skew is really perceivable, and that might just necessitate that I also regard existentialist literature to some degree. Maybe just to contextualize the existentialist core thought, or like basic thought that is implied in these psychological works. But maybe I might go further beyond to, if it turns out I have to follow the logic of these psychological sources. And this is implied not just in Routledge, it's very perceptible there. He actually talks about existential questions, as you can see, but it's really also implied by Peterson to a degree. Now, why would I introduce linguistic sources here? These are included to, well, firstly, due to advice from my advisor. They are highly involved, and I'm myself unsure if my politological brain can do these linguistic concepts justice. I introduced them to first clarify what I don't quite mean when I say meaning, or what I'm going to mean once I actually work the term out for my project here. Firstly, I don't mean what reference semantics sometimes means with meaning. Well, I really have to work on the vocabulary here, which sometimes is the immediate object indicated by a sign, like a linguistic sign. That's not what I mean. I also don't mean what Habermas means, what he calls signification as transient and elusive meaning structured through signs. Also not what Husserl is talking about when he regards the inherent sense or logic of denominated objects. Also not what Firth talks about when he regards meaning as influenced by syntactic and pragmatic context. Then, however, Austin has his speech act theory. Some of you might well have heard of him, theorizes illocutionary and perlocutionary practical action effects of speech acts. This is going far more towards my direction. An illocution would be just the conducting of a speech act. For Habermas, who actually regards Austin quite a bit in his theory, this is more or less offering an interpretation of the words for discourses. And a perlocution would be causing or coercing effects through illocution. For Habermas, this would go towards the matter of strategic action, but it isn't really that clear cut. Nevertheless, this still isn't quite what I'm talking about. And I also introduced these semiotic concepts to relate what I mean to establish semiotic concepts of meaning. So I would basically open the range from the illocutionary and perlocutionary practical action effects of speech acts in contexts of communicative and collective action to the psychologically motivating practical relevance of socio-culturally ascribed meaning of significance. So significance is denominated content of science, at least for some linguists. And then in the end, I would thereby approach what I mean or what I'm going to mean with my, you could call it a socio-psychological term of meaning, which would be which would, for now, it can only be a prefigurative speculation. But meaning would then be a socio-culturally conducted ascription of meaning that explains the practical relevance of significance by their function for and or the intentions and motives of individuals and or societies, and thereby influence the illocutionary and perlocutionary motivation of communicative and collective action. Getting a tongue in my not in my tongue here. Like I said, I know this is highly involved. this is really abstract for me still, and I'm really not sure if I can actually link the linguistic concepts up with the psychological and political theoretical ones as much as I'm hoping so far. But this also just makes it really interesting for me. All right. Hope I'm not going super quickly or like way too quickly. But we have arrived at my current and further readings. I have been regarding Maslow's motivation and personality. Motivation is in the title and in both, I think, my research question and my thesis. So motivation is just a matter I have to address. I'm also going to address newer concepts than Maslow's, because like his is pretty old. And as Vanessa informed me last time, he might actually have very likely have appropriated it from I forget what the Indian nation was called, but he appropriated it from a Indian nation. That much I know. I was going to still read up on that, but for now I'm still really ignorant on it because I prepared this presentation and other things as well in the meantime. I have also been reading up on post-materialism, which records a historical turn towards more meaning-related basic needs, or at least that's how I view it. Ronald Inglehart is sort of the founder of the concept in a way, and his book, The Silent Revolution, has been pretty interesting to me. Here is just an inquiry in a shift from more physiological to more social basic needs in Maslow's sense as well. More of a search for belonging, love, esteem, self-realization, rather than a search for security and physiological needs, which results from security and physiological needs being satisfied while you grew up. And if that's the case, according to Inglehart, you're going to tend to a post-metaphysical, a post-materialist mindset, where your needs are more directed at these more social and, as I understand them, more meaning-related basic needs. I've also been reading the newer works by Roland Benedicta, and these have so far been very implausible for me. I could talk a lot, and actually with Vanessa, I have talked a lot about how implausible I really found these books, but I don't think I'm going to take the time for that now. That would just really be an excursion that doesn't quite fit here. I have some, what I believe will be futile hopes, and these are things I would just really find interesting to confront this meaning concepts with. Maybe I'll be as lucky as to do it after the dissertation. It seems really unlikely that I'll be able to include them into the dissertation, although I really feel like it should be addressed from this perspective as well. And this is not worked out. It's unclear how useful or feasible this will be, like I said. And it's largely an issue of workload and possibly page space. I don't know, like with dissertations. It feels like I have a lot of space right now since I haven't written anything, but I think this might also be a matter in the end. Like these post-structural thinkers, I would really find it interesting. I kind of thought like that from a Foucaultian perspective, you could also call meaning just like a form or a product of power in a lot of ways. I'm really unsure about this. I'd be really interested if to hear from like the post-structuralist leaning people in our group about that. But I'm really unsure as well if I'm going to get to include that. So I'm going to skip from here to my further reading list. Like you can see, and this is just like a selection of what I have there. I got a lot ahead of me. Some of this is just contexts, like Weber, for instance, is just like a really important source for Habermas. So I might, want to read him in the original instead of just Habermas's interpretation. But some of it is also, like really interesting to add. Like effective theory is a strain of political theory. I don't know if everyone has heard of it, but it has a really obvious, like it seems really obviously related, or like it could be related to my research question. Then also like Lacan, I am told he is really, really difficult to read. So that's kind of scary, but also kind of challenging for me. Would be great to be able to include him here. So far, I can't even really say a lot about his theory. But yeah, that's the further reading list. I can address these parts that I skipped later. But for now, I think I would rather get to the discussion than exploring everything here. Now, I have alluded to this. The basic strategy in the end will be to develop a socio-psychological concept of meaning by using both the psychological sources that I have introduced here, that have been written down on my slides here, and very likely some further ones that I haven't regarded yet because I'm foreign to the discipline, and connect them to political theoretical ones and philosophical ones, and likely also the linguistic ones, at least in the sense that I'm going to use them to say what I don't mean, like I did earlier. My main method here will obviously be text interpretation and conceptual analysis. It seems so unnecessary to stress this in a political theory SRC, but I nevertheless wanted to do it because, well, that's what I did for my expose as well. Then I would try to view social interaction, communicative action, and discourse as both the pursuit and the production of meaning. So, like I said, Peterson regards meaning as a product of social interaction. I view Habermas in such a way that the result of communicative action, of discourse, could very much also be seen as meaning, at least in the sense of Peterson, because with the result of a discourse, you're going to end up possibly at a consensus or something as like a proto-consensus where everyone goes away with a new or maybe the same understanding of what something, whatever the object of discussion had been, what meaning something has for their further actions. And that's basically what Peterson said about his conception of meaning. Like I said, I might have to disregard Peterson in the end. So this is still all really complicated, but this is the gist of it. This is the basic construction and strategy that I want to do this in. And then meaning could work as a common denominator of motivation to collective action, to compare post-metaphysical thought or religious and metaphysical worldviews, and religious and metaphysical worldviews, that is. Communicative action would have sort of a hinge function for the transfer from individual psychological action motivation to intersubjective and then collective levels. So because obviously for the psychological sources, this is all concerning the individual, and I have to somehow transfer it to levels beyond the individual. So intersubjective level, there would be Habermas, and then on the level of like true collective action would be like the next step, so to speak. And Habermas would work as a hinge to do that, to be able to do that. Now, I have some hypothesized qualitative dimensions. These are even more prefigurative and speculative. I really can't know what I come up with in the end, if I even have these kinds of qualitative dimensions. I really just included them here to give you maybe more of a concrete picture, so to speak, of what I'm really getting at. So for instance, I could at this point still at least imagine that the difficulty of meaning production would be a factor in how attractive different sources of meaning would be. So putting it really unfairly and inadequately would be, if you believe in God and if you're part of a religious community, you can draw meaning from that quite easily. It's all already there. It's in the text, and it's given to you as part of a cultish practice, and it might very quickly seem reliable enough for you to orient your actions for it. Possibly, on the other hand, post-metaphysical thought might make this really really difficult, because it involves a lot of doubt, doesn't it? And that involves also a lot of problems with orienting your actions. And so looking at it from here, that could explain why with secularization, where there isn't just that homogeneous one religion that defines the society and its norms, people start having problems orientating themselves, and post-metaphysical may not so far have come to a place where it can really replace that formerly religious function. So from there, Böckenförde's and Habermas's analyses might make some sense. Similarly, with sustainability, you could say that as long as in a society everyone is homogeneously agreeing to a, for instance, religious consensus, these meanings that you draw from religion are pretty sustainable. But once secularization sets in more and more, you're going to end up, these meanings, like these norms, are going to end up being called into question a lot, and they end up being less sustainable. For post-metaphysical thought, then, it might turn out that they are more sustainable, at the very least, once like an actual society or like globally wide consensus actually has been reached. That is obviously utopian now. It would need the also probably utopian ideal speech situation to even happen, but theoretically that could arrive at a very high sustainability. And then I already implied the third dimension of social reach. You might feel more secure with the meanings you draw from, be it religion, be it science, as in post-metaphysical thought, when everyone agrees with you, or like at least a lot of people agree with you. The bigger the consensus socially, the more parts of a society agree, the more likely it will be that everyone is going to keep agreeing, and the more intense you may end up feeling that you're right with this meaning perception that you have. All right. As you can see, like, the vocabulary is really not worked out yet. That's because I haven't even constructed the initial term of this socio-psychological meaning, and it ends up getting me kind of, you know, kind of confused as well, and kind of flustered like now, because I haven't really had the ability to work out a vocabulary where I could have distinct terms for different forms and functions of this meaning concept that I'm working on. But nevertheless, I hope this wasn't too quick, and I hope this was at least to a degree understandable. And that's what I would like to know from you guys now. I have some of the literature here that I used. Obviously, everything would be inane to include here. If you guys want, I can, thanks. I can send you the literature. I can send you also the expose at its current point. But for now, I'd be really interested in questions, criticism, and everything else from you guys. Oh. I can go back in the presentation as well, obviously. I think the strategy one is pretty good for an overview.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm thinking, because I approach this question of meaning of life in my pure philosophy module.
Yes.
I wonder whether you have consulted the Stanford Encyclopedia for this page of meaning of life, where you can find the the meaning in value theories, in which they mention about the I forgot the genres, but they have the one with which the nihilist basically denying, and the school which emphasize the existence of God, and the other which emphasize subjective and objective element. And I think when I describe a social psychological concept, it's actually have some relevance to the subjective and objective elements, because like the social is basically objective and the psychological is relevant to the subjective. So you can refer that page, and I think you may get more ideas and inspirations.
All right, that sounds really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I might text you afterwards to ask more about where I can find it. But yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. To be clear, though, I'm not myself looking for the meaning of life with this project. I'm just looking for any sort of meaning, be it like, I mean, the association makes sense because I'm talking about religion as well here. But this could also just be what your sibling means to you. But still, that sounds like I really maybe already should have read it. So thanks for the input.
Yeah, because I think some of the authors you mentioned are also appears in that on that page. So I think it's worth check it out.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hey.
Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. It was really interesting. It was actually quite close to what I'm currently interested in.
Okay.
So the questions of meaning, and especially the way that meaning sort of can drive political action. And I just wanted to throw a couple of suggestions out there. Have you heard about Charles Taylor, for example? He's a famous Canadian sociologist who has worked a lot on I think the sort of the sources of the modern self. And I think so he's very interesting, especially his book, Sources of the Self. And in general, this whole debate between communitarianism and liberalism, I think kind of touches on what you're currently doing. Again, I think I've mentioned him before, Alistair MacIntyre. I think he operates in a sort of Aristotelian framework, which might be interesting as well. I mean, it's a metaphysical framework, but it's also interesting from the part of from the direction of sort of human beings being communicative and social animals, political animals, right? And the last thing that I wanted to suggest is the whole sort of German tradition that you might be familiar with, of sort of Odo Marquardt, for example, or Hans Blumenberg. And I mean, you've mentioned Karl Löwit before, and they're all part of this sort of normative ontological school of political theory here in Germany. And they have worked quite extensively on this question. And I think Böckenförde, to some extent, is also part of that school, right? So yeah, so Blumenberg and Marquardt, I think, are also really interesting in the German tradition.
All right. Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with a lot of those issues. And Charles Taylor, I think he's somewhere further down on my reading list, so I didn't include him here. But maybe I should push him more up. Then the issue, obviously, also is like I'm really not sure about my basing everything so much on Habermas, and I'm like I don't want to be naive in my regarding social interaction and like the capacity of social interaction in language. Like myself, I'm really not that convinced of its reliability to a degree. I think meaning could still be, even from that viewpoint, be addressed as a motivator of action and of collective action. But yeah, I'm just worried because like with Habermas, he can be read and he is often read in the way where it's like you end up at a consensus and that is it and that's how it works and everything is kind of idealized there. And then obviously he says that it's just an ideal, but people end up working with that a lot. And I don't want to want this concept to end up being, well, that you end up at a meaning and then you have it and it's just constant and it's there until it's questioned in an orderly discourse. But then again, like going beyond that divide and also including post-structuralist thinking might just be too hard. And if that's the case, which is likely, those German sources you talked about might be better to be included, just to strengthen the argument on this side first. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, most of these people are first critics of sort of modernity in a way, and especially of some of the drawbacks of modernity, which regard exactly this problem of communicative action and you know, and as sort of a the way that the self is structured in modernity and post-modernity as opposed to you know, the Middle Ages or the ancient times. But I think Charles Taylor and Alistair McIntyre, I'm not overly familiar with them, but they sort of, Alistair McIntyre created a model based on Aristotelianism. So it's a teleological form of thinking, and Charles Taylor comes from a more, not quite sure, but I think he might be more interesting than Alistair McIntyre to your project, because he comes from more of a sociological background and he's more trying to map meaning production as it is going on, as opposed to sort of delivering a normative framework, you know. So Alistair McIntyre seems to me to be more rigid in the way he would define meaning, whereas Charles Taylor is more of a sociologist in that sense, and he's more an observer of meaning, and he's not really trying to enforce a particular kind of meaning or a strong sort of sense of a particular meaning being the right one. Or what.
All right. That's a really, really practical distinction for me as well then. Okay.
I'm just thinking, and I'm trying to remember if I already maybe told you. If I have, I'm sorry if I'm just repeating myself at this point.
It's to be interesting here.
But I feel like if you want to include post-structuralist thought, especially Foucault, but also if you find yourself coming back to Peterson, you should put a special emphasis on what does it mean for meaning to be done or to be constructed in our current social setting. Especially with Peterson, it's capitalism, because he is such a capitalist person, and whenever you use his theory, you have to be reflective about that. But also if you use Foucault, he's such a theorist of the present, like you would historicize the present, and this is what you should do then too. But I would link the capitalistic society with the meaning concept.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes all the sense. And in a lot of ways, that is sort of at least part of the context through which I came to the question anyways. Thinking about those kinds of problems, about problems of politicization and what it means to be political in a capitalist society and so forth. And that's a way too long story, but that's how I somehow ended up with meaning. And that's completely right. Actually, like I said, I talked about the other big public publication by Peterson, 12 Rules for Life. And it is regarded as the way less scientific one. Certainly, I'm really willing to believe that's true. 12 Rules of Life, I haven't read it, and I've only really started with maps of meaning. But even there, you can see it from the beginning. It's everywhere in the subtext, even in his introduction, where he talks about some biographical aspects of his life that led him to the book. You can read it between the lines everywhere, not just the capitalist and individualist view, but also the patriarchal one. And it is really perceptible how little he inquires into his own disposition, into his own ideological disposition, and just takes it all as given, which is part of what really makes me so interested in exploring that. Because when I hear people saying like he really fell off the wagon with 12 Rules for Life, now I'm thinking, how could no one have seen that coming? But yeah, I still have to get more into that. And your actual point with Foucault and capitalism is completely right. I'm really worried that it's going to end up being a sort of calculation between, like I said, about the other things, workload and page space. But I would really, really like to do that. And even if I don't include Foucault, which would be sad, I would still like to do that. Because even then it would not really suffice to just say, well, this is in a historical social vacuum, this is how it would work. Yeah, I'll just have to see about that, I think. Thanks. Any other questions or critiques? Like, I was actually really hoping for critiques. I think also because this really started out as a straight up normative project, like in the very beginning, which was maybe even before my bachelor degree. I was thinking about something similar to this, about meaning and so forth, and it was really aimed normatively. And since then, I've been trying to include a more and more post-structuralist perspective, which has made me understand that it really can't work as easy as I had it in mind first. But if there's no more questions, I think it would be also, oh, Lisa?
No, I was just going to say, I was thinking it's, okay, obviously for grounding it in philosophy, it can be quite broad, but is there really, like, you know, meaning, how it's constructed? There is so many different ways of constructing it. There's so many variables, like even quantitative variables, like how younger people form meaning versus older people form their meaning is quite different. So I was wondering if you're going to ground it in any particular, I wouldn't say necessarily quantitative element, but are you going to ground it in, I mean, you have to give it context at some point, because a very broad kind of version of meaning, it's not going to be necessarily applicable, whereas in some cases, so like in what I do is when I'm looking at climate action, I'm particularly looking at youth groups. And what is amazing to think about is that it almost is a religion to be sustainable. It motivates action. People take it as their essential sense of virtue, and that's something that is shared across the world by these youth activists. But then what their meaning is in terms of their motivation towards collective action, on the surface it seems like it's the same, but when you talk to someone from the Pacific, they have a very different version of their meaning towards what they're doing versus someone, say, living in Europe who's not yet feeling the effects of climate change. They have a different version of what their meaning is. So I guess grounding it in context, I wonder if that's something that, I'm not sure if it's entirely applicable, but otherwise sometimes you can open yourself really much to critiques, because a very broad version of meaning. I think really that's where a lot of modern critiques of kind of even like Habermas are going, is that there's this non-contextual argument. It's not functional, it's not applicable. And if you're saying socio-psychological, there has to be some context if it's going to be brought into a sociology or even a psychological realm as a side of just a pure philosophy. So
yeah, I mean, that's exactly the kind of stuff that makes me really unsure about this. Like, you're hitting the nail on the head. This is the exact, on the one hand, this is the exact itch that I'm trying to scratch here, but on the other hand, it's definitely the biggest invitation for criticism, or like just problems with the thing. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I kind of want to stay on a more, I don't want to say universally aimed, but like a more generally orientated analysis, but nevertheless contextualizing it, bringing it into, like, also what like Vanessa said, like at the very least a historical context, a materialist context, possibly with, you know, capitalism. It definitely has an influence on meaning production as well. That would be good. The problem here for me that I'm seeing right now is just the selection, because if I would do that, I would either have to ground it in like one big example that I'm going to expound very detailed, or I'm going to have loads of different sources that are probably going to interact in unfortunate ways, like, you know, reject each other. Obviously, a lot of these issues are also, you know, to just be figured out when I'm working on the actual dissertation. What I'm certainly going to do is, you know, I'm just going to also profit from the sources my psychological and other sources use. Like Routledge, for instance, he's regarding a whole slew of psychological studies on the cognitive psychology of religion, for instance. And I might just ground it in these areas to a degree. I'm going to have to see especially what I'm going to come up with, because there's a lot, or like quite a bit of literature on the cognitive science of religion, but there really isn't a parallel for non-religious interaction and psychology in that particular way. Or maybe there is, and I just haven't found it because I'm not a psychologist. That is going to be a really, really difficult and really important part of this project, certainly. And that might just be its downfall, to be very dramatic. That's going to really be really, really hard. I want to be able to say something about all of that in general. Like with the example you just made about the youth groups, that just seemed to me to be exactly that. That's exactly that, you know, that's exactly what I'm getting at. And precisely what you said, it seems almost like a religion. And I'm just really fascinated by how that works out. You know, when I was quite young, or when I was in school, I was in a way religiously atheist, if that makes sense, because I was just so proud about my atheist conscience. I saw there's the big enlightenment. No, I was really small, you guys. You know, that sort of arrogance, I have come across it since then with other people. That's just really fascinating, how people want to make so much about from the little moments of you know, well, for instance, enlightenment, or just, you know, connection with other people. That would really be it. And I want to be able to say something on a general level about all these instances, be it youth groups, or be it religious communities, or whatever else it may be. You know, like Facebook groups, I don't know. But that might just be way too big. And like you said, I may end up just having to ground my research on a few examples, and then pepper it with the examples my sources also introduce. I will have to see about that. Is that a satisfying answer? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those things. It's difficult because we don't have, when a lot of these sources were originally written, communities were very small, homogenous, whereas now we have so many influencing factors. Like I work a lot with network theory.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of social capital theory. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that identity formation now and then constructs of meaning, they're not informed necessarily by the world in our immediate vicinity, because we have things like the internet, we have access to information outside. So
yeah.
And then what does even collective action mean? You know, that's another complicated, like collective action. Like I'm obviously looking at a protest movement, so that's pretty easy in that way. But then collective action, do you define it as something that communities come together in terms of to act for the collective good, or do you look at it collective action towards a specific outcome that can be more universal? So there are so many, it's very interesting. I think there's just so many avenues. You could end up with a whole lot of information, and it'd be very difficult to get an outcome without something that's somewhat grounded.
Yeah,
but that's just my opinion. I come from social science, so we're made contextualize everything. So maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, but that's a good thing to do. And you really touched upon a whole, like a congruent, like a near, but like whole different problem as well, which is the level of analysis, right? Because exactly, I mean, in general, I was just gonna stay with the understandings of collective actions that I find in like renommed literature, like Olson, for instance, and a couple of others, work that out, come to an understanding. That isn't like collective action as a topic on its own isn't my topic. My topic is like a part of the possible sources of motivation for collective actions. Nevertheless, though, I myself, like outside of the project, I'm interested in all levels. I'm interested in collective action within a family, and I'm interested in collective action on a nation state or a global level as well. And I'm interested in collective actions on the level of associations, like unions. And that is very likely too big. And I'm still, you know, in the process of working out where I can best start with this direction of inquiry. Really, maybe protest movements, or at least that meso level, might be a good way to go. Now that you're saying it, because it's not too closed off, it's not too specific. It still encompasses large swaths of societies.
It's also got a historical context when we think about how meaning, like even the meaning of religion has changed, like, you know, the ultimate protest movement, Luther, like, you know, so there's so much you could bring in. But yeah, it's difficult to find a sphere of analysis. I guess is really it. That's the difficult point, I guess.
I'm gonna write that down for sure. Yeah, so well, unsurprisingly, I've got a lot to think about. And I got a lot of work ahead of me, which I knew, but you guys, also you specifically, Lisa, really helped me a lot with coming up with some specific problem areas that I need to really address more. Yeah, I think that's going to happen once I can also be more sure about the concept level of my analysis, just like coming up with the concept. And then I'm likely going to be way more able to say where I can even ground it. Like maybe some conditions need to be fulfilled for me to really apply that concept, insofar as I even will be able to. Yeah, a lot to think about. Thank you guys very much for your comments.
I have one question if we still have time.
I think we can probably make it. We're just a little beyond our time, but I think we can probably make it, unless people are annoyed or something.
Sorry.
I don't think.
Maybe could you go to your references?
The literature.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you said that you wanted to be more like a general-oriented analysis, and you're interested in the collective action and the source of motivation in so many levels. I don't know if this is just a comment, but most of your literature is from German scholars, and I think that all of them are European, if I'm not wrong. So maybe subconsciously you have already started to narrow down where you want to focus, because you can't really do it in such a general oriented analysis. And you can't say that it's general and universally acceptable and applicable and have only white dudes in your references. But this is not necessarily bad. I'm not saying it as, oh my God, this is terrible, like that form of criticism. You need to narrow it down, and you narrowing it down this way is also a good start.
You're 100% correct. The reason it is like that, I mean, some of the sources are just German versions of non-German authors, but nevertheless, they're all like European or like Western authors, for sure. It is to a degree also a result of my writing my expose for applications and putting it into a presentation format. And there I just needed certain content to get there in time. And so I started out with my, unfortunately, very, very German, very Frankfurt centered, if you will.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yeah. I'm not really happy about that either. I need to read more. I need to go beyond critical theory, or at the very least I would like to. And yes, you're absolutely right. I can't ever call it general or anything towards that direction, as long as I don't go beyond the very limited scope of European thinking. Definitely. Yeah. So
I have one more thing. Most of your resources are, again, they're quite in the classic readings, from what we can characterize as classic readings. Have you maybe thought, like, since you're looking in collective action, and as Lisa said, it is quite a modern topic, of diversifying it in that way too, like looking into more recent literature?
Actually, yeah, I had a lot of that in my expose, but those were never the works that really served to expound the ground structure of what I want to do. Those were like the things I found, like you said, like collective action is really modern thing, but a lot of it is really working on the basis of what people like Olson, or what were the other ones called? I have it here on the earlier theory. Right, Drescher, Downs, Neumann. Well, that's pretty old. What they worked on. And then they have empirical, like I found a lot of empirical studies applying and adjusting those concepts, testing them. Yeah. But like the age and like the like you said, classical nature of all my sources is another problem that I'm trying to work on. It's just a lot to read. And I'm really looking forward to it so much, but I'm also still in the process of even applying for getting to write my dissertation. And that always ends up leaving me, you know, engaged with those basics. And then I end up, you know, going for those sources. And it's really just also a thing of like, I can be most sure of my interpretations of those authors that I know the most about. And unfortunately, I sort of railed myself into that really Eurocentric direction during my studies, and now I find myself sitting here and having trouble getting quite out of it, because it's a sort of what do you call it? Can't think of the term right now, but like I'm really bound towards that perspective, and because I know most about that, I end up using it again, and I never quite find the time to go beyond it. So I really probably just have to prioritize that more.
Can I have a quick remark?
Sure.
Yeah, when talking about collective action, I think that you can consult also, probably you've heard about him, James Buchanan, from the public choice theory.
Yeah.
That was
right. Collective action, James Buchanan.
James B.
Yeah, no, I know him.
Okay, great.
I've heard of him. And newer sources, gonna write that down as well. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm gonna have to really see how much collective action literature I can include. But yeah, I'll at the very least have to have a full body of literature behind my works to even just, you know, have a proper selection of sources for that part of it. All right. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. Thank you guys so much for the input.